Part 1. The white figure in the rain. The autumn rain had started at midnight, but by 3 o'clock in the morning, it had turned into a thick curtain of water, lashing at everything like cold whips. On the empty street, the dim yellow streetlights flickered through the mist. At the far end of the road, the gate of St. Mary's Hospital cast a white halo of light, reflecting off the slick asphalt like a darkened mirror. In that glow, a white figure appeared, standing motionless, like a stone statue, in the entrance to the emergency ward. It was a deer. Its entire body was soaked, the grayish-brown fur clinging tightly to its frame, revealing every tense muscle. Its ears stood upright, listening for the smallest sound amid the pounding rain. Its eyes, large, deep, reflecting the light into two trembling orbs, were fixed directly on the glass doors where the hospital's light spilled out. There was no sign of fear, no skittishness like a wild animal encountering humans. On the contrary, its gaze held something urgent. The atmosphere felt strangely surreal. The faint sound of an ambulance siren drifted from far away, as if from another world, blending with the steady patter of rain on the awning. Occasionally, the deer's breathing could be heard, not too fast, yet not calm either. It seemed to be holding itself in a state just shy of panic, but ready to move if necessary. A strong gust of wind swept through, carrying with it a wave of biting cold air into the hospital lobby. The automatic blast doors slid open and shut, revealing the bright interior and the hurried figures of medical staff inside. But outside, in the flooded courtyard, the deer remained, like a surreal painting forgotten in the middle of real life. No one knew when it had arrived. Security cameras would later show that, just a few minutes earlier, it had emerged from the dark alley beside the hospital, paused, and walked directly to this spot. No frantic running, no glancing around, just standing there, eyes locked on the people inside. Why would a deer be here, in the middle of the city, at 3 in the morning, in the middle of a pounding rainstorm? And why did its gaze seem to hold a plea for help so clear that anyone who saw it would stop in their tracks? The answer, if there was one, still lay somewhere in the wet, cold darkness of the rainy night. But at this moment, it had unknowingly become the center of a story no one at St. Mary's Hospital could have anticipated. Part 2. The object in its mouth. Dr. Emily Carter was sorting through the last of the night shift's paperwork when her eyes happened to wander toward the glass window. She froze, narrowing her gaze. Beyond the silver curtain of rain, the deer's figure was clearer than ever. It was still in the same spot, standing in the light spilling from the hospital gate, unmoving as though the wind and rain had nothing to do with it. At first, Emily thought it had wandered into the city, not an uncommon event. Especially for animals from the northern forest, storms often left them disoriented, but something was different. It made no attempt to find shelter, nor did it appear frightened by people moving behind the glass. From even this distance, she could feel it. This was not the gaze of a creature that had wandered here by accident. This was the gaze of one that knew exactly where it had come to. She grabbed the raincoat hanging by the door and stepped outside. Cold water slapped against her face, the wind tugging at the coat until it billowed. As she drew closer, Emily noticed the deer's lower jaw moving slightly. It was holding something, a small, soft piece of white cloth, drooping from the corner of its mouth. Her chest tightened when she saw a dark stain at the tip of the cloth, the deep red of blood, washed and blurred by the rain into faint streaks. She stopped, keeping a distance of several yards. The deer did not flinch. Its wide eyes stayed locked on Emily. For a moment, she felt as though he was looking straight through her raincoat, through the night itself, into the deepest part of her mind. This was not the stare of a predator, nor the fearful glance of prey, but the look of a messenger with urgent news. The curiosity she had felt was slowly replaced by something heavier, unease. Unease without a clear cause, yet one that urged her to move closer. "What is it, Emily?" a man's voice called from behind. It was Mike, the night security guard. He held a flashlight and slowed his pace beside her. Emily tilted her head toward the deer, speaking softly. "It is holding something. There is blood." Mike stepped forward and shone the light. The deer instantly retreated half a yard, just enough to keep the beam from hitting it directly. But it did not run. It simply stepped back, then held its ground. "It seems it does not want us to catch it," Mike said, frowning. "No, It wants us to follow it," Emily said, surprising herself with how naturally the words had slipped out. Indeed, when Mike took another step, the deer moved back again, but its gaze never left them. Then, it turned its head toward the dark forest behind the hospital and began walking slowly. After a few steps, it stopped and looked back. The rain was still coming down hard. The hospital gate's light reached only so far before the darkness swallowed it whole. And there, at the edge where the light ended and the shadows began, the deer waited, the white cloth still hanging, the red stain spreading with each drop of rain. Emily felt a powerful pull. If she did not follow, she would never know what was hidden behind those eyes, and her instincts told her this was no small matter. Part 3. Into the night, the deer turned its head again. Its slender yet sturdy neck leaned slightly forward, raindrops sliding from the tips of its ears down onto the white cloth it carried in its mouth. Its silhouette blurred in the thin mist that mingled with the vapor rising from the cold pavement. Emily hesitated for a second, then turned to Mike. "Call for 2 more nurses on duty. I want someone to bring a medical kit." 5 minutes later, under the pale yellow lights of the hospital courtyard, 4 figures, Emily, Mike, and 2 young nurses, Sarah and Tom, began following the deer. Mike's flashlight cast a white beam across the wet ground, chasing after each short leap, each slow step of the animal. At first, Emily thought they would only walk a few dozen yards, at most reaching the fence behind the hospital, but the deer went straight across the gravel path into the northern forest. Where ancient oak trees stood packed together like silent soldiers, the sound of the rain on the leaves grew heavier, thicker, as if they had stepped through an invisible doorway, leaving the man-made world behind and entering another realm entirely. Within minutes, the glow at the hospital had disappeared. Only darkness remained, and the sound of the rain, and the breathing of those walking beneath their rain-soaked coats. From time to time, the deer would stop and look back, even when the flashlight could only catch part of its face. Its eyes still held that same strange mix of urgency and calm. Emily began noticing something else. Each time it stopped, faint red stains appeared on the ground, spreading in the rain. She signaled for Mike to shine the light downward. Among the layer of decaying leaves and muddy soil, deer tracks were mingled with long, dark red streaks. They were not continuous, but every few steps, another stretch appeared. Sarah spoke softly, her voice catching. "That is not its blood, right?" Emily stayed silent. A thought crossed her mind. If the deer were badly wounded, it would not be leading them this far with such persistence. And the cloth in its mouth, the blood there had dried before the rain blurred it. Suddenly, through the constant patter of rain, another sound reached their ears. Very faint, like shallow breathing or a muffled moan. They all stopped, straining to listen. Mike aimed the flashlight toward the sound. There was nothing but dense shrubs and thick darkness. Then, the sound came again, weaker, but clearer. The deer stood ahead of them, still looking back, then moved on, turning into a narrower path where low branches nearly closed off the way. They had to stoop low to pass through. Just a few yards in, Tom froze. Hanging from a low branch of a bush was a pale pink wool scarf, heavy with mud and rain. Along its edge, the blood had dried to a dark brown. Emily touched the scarf lightly. The twisted strands of yarn seemed stretched, as if yanked hard before becoming snagged there. She lifted her gaze toward the darkness where the deer had vanished. No one said a word, but all of them understood. This could not be a coincidence. And if that sound was real, they were about to find something or someone. Part 4. The secret under the trees. The deer stopped beneath the trunk of an ancient oak, so wide that it would take 3 grown adults to encircle it with their arms. The thick canopy above blocked most of the rain, leaving a shallow, drier patch of earth around the base. The scent of damp soil rose into the air, mingled with another smell, the faint but unmistakable metallic tang of blood. Emily slowed her pace, fingers tightening around the strap of the medical bag. Mike swept the flashlight over the ground. The beam slid across layers of rotting leaves, then halted. A small body lay curled in the hollow of the earth. It was a little girl, about 5 years old. Her brown hair was matted from the rain, her clothes torn in several places. Her left arm was clutched tightly to her chest, her hand bluish from the cold. Her face was pale, her lips parted just enough for the faintest breath, barely visible to the naked eye. Emily dropped to her knees, her hands trembling with both shock and urgency. She placed 2 fingers under the girl's nose. A weak puff of air brushed her skin. Alive, Sarah knelt beside her, quickly opening the medical kit. "Severe hypothermia," Emily said, her voice urgent but steady. "We need to get her warm immediately." Mike stepped back and called for an ambulance over his radio. His voice carried through the rain. "We have a female child, approximately 5 years old, unconscious, in need of immediate transport. Location, north of the hospital. Edge of the forest." Tom pulled out a thermal blanket and wrapped it around the child's body. Emily pressed her ear to the little chest, counting heartbeats, slow but steady. She looked up, her eyes showing a brief flicker of relief, though her face remained tense. "We still have time, but we must get her back right now." As Tom and Sarah prepared to lift the girl, Mike suddenly asked, "Emily, do you recognize her?" Emily looked closer. Then, memory flooded back. Hours earlier, they had treated a woman in critical condition from a severe car accident. During the check-in, there had been no information about any children. That woman was still unconscious in intensive care, but this face was a smaller, mirror image of hers. A shiver ran down Emily's spine. No one had known the child had been with her mother. No one knew she had vanished after the crash. And now, a deer had led them straight to her. Emily lifted the girl gently. The tiny body was icy cold and limp in her arms. When she looked up, she met the deer's gaze. It stood a few yards away, drenched, its breath visible in the rain-chilled air. For a moment, Emily felt their eyes connect on a level no words could reach. Those eyes, wide and deep, seemed to ask, "You will save her, won't you?" Emily gave a small nod. Just a slight movement, but she saw the deer's eyes close briefly, as if releasing a breath. Then it turned, stepping slowly back into the rain-soaked forest. The wail of the approaching ambulance grew louder. Emily's team began moving, racing against each fragile heartbeat in the child's chest. On the wet ground, the footprints of humans overlapped those of the deer, leading back toward the glow of the hospital lights. Part 5. The guide disappears. The ambulance's wheels churned through the wet earth, leaving long trails of mud. The rear doors swung open, spilling cold white light into the dark forest. Emily and Sarah gently laid the little girl onto the stretcher, tucking the thermal blanket more securely around her, then pulled the oxygen mask into place. "Her heartbeat is a little stronger now," Sarah reported, though her voice was still taut like a stretched wire. Mike held the ambulance door, his eyes fixed on the shadowy tree line. There, about 10 yards away, the deer still stood, in the pulsing lights of the ambulance. Its shape seemed to glow faintly, part real, part a trick of eyes worn down by exhaustion. Emily took a step toward it, but before she could speak, the deer lifted its head slightly, its ears twitching in the wind. Then, without a sound, it turned. Its 4 legs moved in slow, deliberate strides, carrying it into the curtain of rain. For a few seconds, the ambulance's light still caught its form, turning it into a faint silhouette among the dark trunks. Then, when the beam swept past a large tree, it was gone, as if it had never been there at all. Only small hoof prints remained, leading deeper into the forest. Rain quickly began to wash them away. Emily stood still. It was not a feeling of loss, nor of relief, just a strange emptiness, where questions and answers overlapped but refused to take shape. The engine roared to life, and the ambulance began to move. Emily stepped inside and pulled the rear doors shut. In the brief moment before they closed, she glanced back one last time, but in the rain, there was only the dark forest and the sound of rustling leaves. 3 hours later, dawn broke. The rain had eased, leaving only droplets falling from the eaves onto the mottled courtyard below. News came from the intensive care unit. The mother had woken up. When she learned her daughter was in the next room, she sat up at once, ignoring the sharp pain of her injuries. The reunion happened in a spotless white room, the smell of antiseptic in every breath. The mother held her child and wept, tears falling into the little girl's hair. Emily stood in the corner, watching. Even in the completeness of that joy, she felt there was a missing piece that would never quite fit. When Emily told her the story, the mother stayed silent for a long time. Then she spoke, her voice hoarse. When I was a child, my father often took me into the northern forest. There was a doe that used to come close, not afraid of people. My father said it was the offspring of a deer he had once freed from a hunter's trap. When I was 10, that doe disappeared, but I still remember its eyes, just like the ones you described. Emily left the room when the daylight had fully broken. Outside the glass windows, raindrops still clung to the treetops, reflecting the weak morning sun. She did not know whether this story had an answer, but one thing was certain: on that rainy night, a life had been saved, thanks to a silent guide that vanished back into the place it belonged. Part 6: Heartbeats Without Words. In the days that followed, the story of the deer that saved a life spread through St. Mary's Hospital like a warm breeze in the cold of autumn. Some saw it as an unbelievable coincidence. Others were convinced it was proof of the intelligence and compassion of animals. But no matter their view, everyone agreed what happened that night had gone far beyond the bounds of an ordinary story. Emily returned to the northern forest a few times, in the early mornings and in the fading light of late afternoons. She brought a few apples and some fresh grass, placing them on a moss-covered rock near the place where they had found the girl. But the deer never appeared again. Only the sound of wind through the branches and the dappled sunlight falling on the forest floor remained. She realized she was not disappointed. Its disappearance felt like a chapter closing at exactly the right moment. The answer, if there was one, did not need to be seen, because what it had left behind was already deep enough to touch the heart. One evening, watching the little girl play with her mother in the hospital's small garden, Emily suddenly thought of that moment when the deer's eyes locked onto hers. In that instant, there had been no boundary between human and animal, between words and silence, only two living beings, sharing the same singular mission, to save a heartbeat that was fading away. She remembered something an old doctor who once worked there had said: in emergencies, heart speaks to heart faster than any language. That night, the deer's heartbeat and her own had moved together in the same purpose. And perhaps that was why it had come to the hospital gates, why it had chosen her eyes among dozens of others. Life at St. Mary's soon returned to its regular rhythm, but whenever rain fell at night, Emily found herself unconsciously looking toward the gate. In her mind, the image of the drenched deer standing in the yellow light was still vivid: the deep eyes, the heaving breath, and the white cloth stained with blood hanging from its mouth. There are moments when the boundary between human and animal disappears completely. No predator, no prey, no rescuer, no rescued, only a primal empathy, an invisible thread binding all living things that can feel pain and love. Sometimes, salvation comes from where we least expect it, from creatures we might see as strangers, whose names we will never know. And when it does, it leaves a mark that never fades, a reminder that the world is far larger than we imagine. In an old journal, Emily wrote, "I may never see it again, but I know that somewhere out there, heartbeats without words are still finding each other, even in the rain." The final image of this story, if someone wished to keep it, would not be the moment of reunion in the hospital, nor the ambulance racing through the night. It would be the deer in the rain, just before it turned away, its shadow merging with the dark canopy, vanishing like a breath into the air. And deep inside everyone who has heard this story, there will always be a question without an answer, and no need for one.